The date is May 20th, 1940. Construction crews break ground in occupied Poland, beginning work on what would become history's most systematic killing machine. But this isn't just another wartime facility. Every brick, every fence, every building in this complex was designed with one chilling purpose in mind: to strip away humanity itself and turn murder into an industrial process. What you're about to discover isn't just the story of a concentration camp. It's the terrifying blueprint of how evil architects can transform ordinary spaces into instruments of genocide. The designers of Auschwitz didn't stumble into their methods by accident. They calculated every detail, engineered every system, and perfected every process to maximize suffering and death. By the time this video ends, you'll understand exactly how the Nazis created their most efficient killing machine and why the design of Auschwitz remains one of the most chilling examples of human engineering gone wrong. But before we dive into the horrifying mechanics of this place, we need to understand how it all began. The location wasn't chosen randomly. Polish officials had already established railway connections near the town of Auschwitz, making it perfect for mass transportation. The area sat roughly 25 miles from Krakow, close enough to populated regions for logistical support, but isolated enough to hide its true operations from the world. The Nazis saw potential in this strategic positioning and immediately began transforming it into something far more sinister. Initially, Auschwitz I served as a detention center for Polish resistance fighters and political prisoners. The original brick buildings built by the Austrian military decades earlier provided a ready-made foundation. But as Nazi ambitions grew darker and more expansive, so did their plans for this facility. The first inmates arrived in June 1940. They had no idea they were about to become test subjects in the most systematic approach to dehumanization ever conceived. These early prisoners were forced to expand the camp themselves, laying the groundwork for their own destruction and the annihilation of hundreds of thousands who would follow. What made Auschwitz different from other camps wasn't just its size or scope. It was the deliberate, methodical way every aspect was designed to break down human dignity before destroying human life. The architects and planners behind this complex understood psychology as much as they understood construction. They knew that to kill efficiently, they first had to strip away everything that made their victims human. The entrance to Auschwitz I featured those infamous words: Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. This wasn't just propaganda, it was psychological warfare. The sign gave false hope to those entering, making them believe they might actually survive if they worked hard enough. This cruel deception served a practical purpose. Compliant prisoners were easier to manage and less likely to resist. But as horrific as Auschwitz I was, it was just the beginning. By 1942, the original camp had reached capacity and Nazi plans had evolved far beyond simple imprisonment. They needed something bigger, more efficient, more deadly. That's when construction began on Auschwitz II, also known as Birkenau. Birkenau wasn't designed as a prison camp. It was engineered as a death factory. Every aspect of its layout served the single purpose of killing as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, with maximum efficiency and minimum resistance. The planners drew up blueprints that would make mass murder feel routine, almost bureaucratic. The complex eventually sprawled across 140 hectares, but its true horror lay not in its size, but in its organization. Different sections were designated for different types of prisoners: Jews, Roma, political prisoners, criminals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Each group was marked with specific badges and housed in separate areas. This wasn't random segregation. It was a calculated strategy to prevent unity and organized resistance. The railway system became the camp's circulatory system. Trains could deliver thousands of victims directly into the heart of the killing operation. The infamous selection ramp, where SS doctors decided who would live temporarily and who would die immediately, was positioned for maximum efficiency. Those deemed unfit for work could be marched directly to the gas chambers without ever seeing the main camp. The gas chambers themselves represent perhaps the most chilling example of industrial design applied to genocide. These weren't hastily constructed killing rooms. They were carefully engineered spaces designed to deceive victims until the very last moment. The chambers were built to look like shower facilities, complete with fake shower heads and benches where people could leave their belongings. The deception extended to every detail. Signs in multiple languages directed people to hang up their clothes and remember where they placed them, suggesting they would return after their shower. This psychological manipulation served a crucial purpose. Keeping victims calm and compliant made the murder process smoother and more efficient. Adjacent to each gas chamber stood a crematorium, connected by a system that allowed bodies to be moved quickly from murder to disposal. The entire process from arrival to cremation was designed to flow like an assembly line. Nazi engineers had literally industrialized genocide, but the killing apparatus was only one component of Auschwitz's evil design. The camp also featured an extensive slave labor operation, most notably at Auschwitz I, known as Monowitz. This section functioned as a massive factory complex, primarily producing synthetic rubber and fuel for the German war effort. The labor camp wasn't separate from the extermination operation. It was integrated into it. Prisoners who survived the initial selection were worked to death under brutal conditions. When they became too weak to continue, they were sent to the gas chambers. This created a constantly replenishing supply of slave labor while ensuring that few witnesses to the camp's operations would survive. The barracks themselves were engineered for maximum suffering. Wooden and brick buildings housed far more people than they were designed to hold. Three-tier bunks crammed prisoners into spaces barely wide enough for a single person. The buildings lacked proper insulation, heating, or sanitation facilities. These weren't oversights in the design. They were deliberate features meant to weaken prisoners physically and psychologically. Even the camp's administrative structure reflected its evil design. SS quarters were built in a separate section, completely isolated from the prisoner areas. These buildings featured proper heating, comfortable furnishings, and all the amenities needed for normal life. The contrast was intentional. It allowed guards and administrators to live comfortably while orchestrating mass murder just meters away. The camp's medical facilities deserve special attention because they reveal another layer of the complex's sinister design. What appeared to be hospitals were actually sites for horrific medical experiments. Doctors like Joseph Mengele used prisoners as test subjects for procedures that had no medical value whatsoever. These weren't healing centers, they were laboratories for torture disguised as medical research. Storage facilities nicknamed Canada by prisoners were built to sort and process the belongings of murder victims. 30 barracks housed the possessions of thousands of daily arrivals. Workers were forced to organize everything from clothing to jewelry to family photographs, packaging them to support the Nazi war effort. This system turned theft into another industrial process. The kitchen facilities were strategically positioned throughout the camp, but they weren't designed to feed prisoners adequately. The rations provided barely enough calories to sustain life, keeping prisoners weak and compliant while extracting maximum labor from their deteriorating bodies. What makes Auschwitz's design so terrifying isn't just its efficiency at killing. It's how every element worked together to create a system that destroyed human dignity before destroying human life. The architects and planners behind this complex understood that breaking people psychologically made them easier to murder physically. This systematic approach to dehumanization and genocide didn't happen by accident. It was the result of careful planning, detailed engineering, and deliberate design choices made by people who understood exactly what they were creating. The psychological warfare didn't stop with the physical structures. Every routine, every rule, every daily procedure was crafted to reinforce the camp's ultimate message. You are no longer human. The morning roll call, known as appel, exemplifies this calculated cruelty. Prisoners were forced to stand motionless in formation for hours, regardless of weather conditions. Rain, snow, freezing temperatures, none of it mattered. Guards would deliberately extend these sessions, sometimes for an entire day, if a single prisoner was missing or if someone collapsed. This wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about demonstrating absolute control over every aspect of human existence. The message was clear. Your time, your comfort, your basic needs mean nothing. You exist only at our discretion. Prisoners who fell during roll call were left where they dropped. Those who tried to help them were beaten or killed. The system was designed to eliminate compassion, turning survival into a solitary struggle. The uniforms prisoners wore were another element of this systematic dehumanization. Striped clothing wasn't chosen for practicality or cost. These garments were designed to strip away individual identity and reduce human beings to anonymous numbers. The fabric was deliberately thin and poorly made, offering no protection against the elements. Shoes, when provided at all, were often mismatched or the wrong size, making walking painful and escape nearly impossible. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the camp's design was how it turned prisoners against each other. The Nazi administrators created a hierarchy among inmates, appointing some as capos, prisoner functionaries who supervised other prisoners. These positions came with slightly better living conditions and a marginally higher chance of survival. This system served multiple purposes. It reduced the number of SS guards needed, created internal conflict among prisoners, and forced victims to participate in their own oppression. The capo system reveals the true genius of evil behind Auschwitz's design. By forcing prisoners to police themselves, the Nazis created a structure where resistance became nearly impossible. How do you organize a revolt when you can't trust the person sleeping next to you? How do you maintain hope when survival might depend on betraying someone else? This psychological manipulation was as deadly as any gas chamber. The camp's economic structure was equally calculated. Prisoners weren't just killed, they were exploited for maximum profit before their deaths. The slave labor operation generated enormous wealth for German corporations like IG Farben, which operated the synthetic rubber factory at Monowitz. These companies didn't accidentally benefit from slave labor. They actively participated in the camp's design, providing input on how to extract maximum productivity from dying workers. The relationship between private industry and the extermination apparatus reveals another layer of Auschwitz's evil design. This wasn't just a government operation. It was a public-private partnership in genocide. Companies provided technical expertise, financing, and logistical support in exchange for access to free labor and stolen resources. The entire German economy became complicit in the systematic murder of innocents. Communication systems within the camp were designed to maintain the deception until the very end. Multilingual signs directed people through the killing process, always suggesting that cooperation would lead to better treatment. Letters were allowed to be sent from certain sections of the camp, but they were heavily censored and used to reassure families that their relatives were safe and working. These messages served as bait, encouraging more people to comply with deportation orders. The transportation system that fed prisoners into Auschwitz was itself a masterpiece of logistical evil. Cattle cars were deliberately overcrowded, with no food, water, or sanitation facilities. Journeys that should have taken hours were extended for days. Many prisoners died during transport, which served the camp's purposes perfectly. Those who survived arrived weakened, disoriented, and traumatized, making them easier to control and process. The timing of deportations was carefully coordinated with the camp's capacity for murder. Transports arrived on schedules that matched the availability of gas chambers and crematoriums. This coordination required extensive communication between railway officials, camp administrators, and SS leadership across occupied Europe. The Holocaust wasn't a chaotic explosion of violence. It was a carefully orchestrated operation involving thousands of participants. Medical facilities at Auschwitz deserve deeper examination because they represent one of the most twisted aspects of the camp's design. The hospital barracks weren't built to heal prisoners. They were constructed to conduct experiments on human subjects while maintaining the pretense of medical care. Doctors performed procedures without anesthesia, infected healthy prisoners with diseases, and conducted sterilization experiments on children. These weren't rogue doctors acting independently. They were following research protocols approved by German medical institutions. The camp's record-keeping system reveals the bureaucratic nature of genocide. Every prisoner was documented, photographed, and assigned a number that was tattooed on their body. Every death was recorded. Every possession was catalogued. This meticulous documentation wasn't about efficiency. It was about control. The Nazis wanted to track every aspect of the killing process, partly to improve their methods and partly to maintain the illusion that this was a legitimate administrative operation. The construction of Auschwitz required thousands of workers, tons of materials, and enormous financial resources. None of this happened in secret. Local populations knew something terrible was occurring. Railway workers transported the victims. Construction companies built the facilities. Suppliers provided the equipment. The camp's existence depended on the participation or complicity of countless ordinary people who chose to look the other way. As Soviet forces advanced toward the camp in late 1944, the Nazis began implementing their final phase of Auschwitz's design: the destruction of evidence. Crematoriums were dismantled, documents were burned. Prisoners who had witnessed the worst atrocities were murdered to eliminate testimony. The camp's architects had even planned for this eventuality, designing systems that could be quickly dismantled to hide their crimes. The evacuation of Auschwitz in January 1945 represented the culmination of its evil design. Rather than simply abandoning the camp, SS guards forced approximately 60,000 prisoners on death marches westward. These weren't desperate last-minute decisions. They were planned operations designed to eliminate witnesses and continue the killing process even as the camp itself was being abandoned. The death marches weren't random acts of cruelty. They were the final expression of Auschwitz's systematic design philosophy. Guards had specific instructions about maintaining pace, eliminating stragglers, and disposing of bodies along the route. Even in retreat, the Nazis continued to implement their methodical approach to murder. When Soviet troops finally liberated Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, they found fewer than 7,000 survivors among the prisoners who had been too sick to evacuate. The liberators also discovered warehouses filled with human hair, tons of shoes, and mountains of personal belongings. These weren't random collections of items. They were the organized remnants of an industrial killing operation that had processed over 1 million human beings. The efficiency of Auschwitz's design becomes clear when you examine the numbers. At its peak in 1944, the camp could murder up to 6,000 people per day. This wasn't achieved through random violence or uncontrolled brutality. It was the result of careful engineering, systematic planning, and continuous refinement of murder techniques. The camp's operators treated genocide like any other industrial process, constantly seeking ways to increase output while reducing costs. The gas chambers themselves underwent multiple design iterations as engineers worked to improve their efficiency. Early chambers were converted buildings that proved inadequate for mass killing. Later constructions were purpose-built facilities designed from the ground up for murder. Ventilation systems were installed to remove gas more quickly. Doors were reinforced to prevent escape attempts. Even the fake shower heads were positioned to maintain the deception until the final moments. The crematorium design reveals the same systematic approach. Early facilities couldn't handle the volume of bodies being produced, leading to the construction of larger, more efficient units. Engineers calculated burn times, fuel requirements, and body capacity with the same precision they might use for any other industrial process. When even these improved facilities became overwhelmed, open-air burning pits were dug to handle the overflow. What makes Auschwitz's evil design so chilling isn't just its effectiveness at killing. It's how it normalized murder through bureaucracy and routine. Guards clocked in and out like factory workers. Administrators filed reports about daily quotas. Engineers submitted improvement proposals for killing equipment. The entire operation was structured to make genocide feel like just another job. The camp's financial systems were equally systematic. Valuables taken from victims were sorted, appraised, and shipped to German banks. Gold teeth were removed and melted down. Currency was counted and deposited. Even human hair was processed and sold to textile manufacturers. Every aspect of murder was monetized and integrated into the broader German economy. This economic integration reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Auschwitz's design. It was profitable. The camp didn't just serve ideological goals, it generated wealth for the Nazi state and private corporations. This created powerful incentives to continue and expand the killing operation. Genocide became a business model. The psychological impact on perpetrators was also carefully managed through the camp's design. Guards lived in comfortable quarters separated from the killing areas. They had access to entertainment, alcohol, and regular leave. The camp even had a swimming pool and sports facilities for German personnel. This separation wasn't accidental. It allowed ordinary people to participate in genocide while maintaining psychological distance from their actions. The training programs for camp personnel reveal the systematic nature of the operation. New guards received detailed instruction on camp procedures, prisoner management, and killing techniques. These weren't improvised methods learned on the job. They were standardized protocols developed through experience and refined over time. The Nazis literally created an educational system for genocide. Documentation from Auschwitz shows constant communication between camp administrators and higher authorities about improving efficiency. Reports discussed bottlenecks in the killing process, equipment failures, and proposals for expansion. These communications read like ordinary business correspondence, except they're discussing the mass murder of human beings. The camp's expansion over time demonstrates how success bred further evil. What began as a single camp for Polish prisoners grew into a massive complex capable of industrial-scale genocide. Each success led to bigger ambitions, more sophisticated methods, and greater capacity for destruction. The system literally evolved to become more deadly. The integration of Auschwitz into the broader Nazi administrative structure shows how genocide became normalized across German society. Bureaucrats processed deportation orders. Railway officials scheduled transport trains, construction companies built facilities, suppliers provided equipment. Thousands of people participated in the operation while maintaining the fiction that they were just doing their jobs. The camp's design also reveals how the Nazis learned from their earlier killing operations. Techniques developed in the euthanasia program were refined and scaled up. Methods tested in other camps were implemented and improved. Auschwitz represented the culmination of years of experimentation in systematic murder. The post-war testimony of survivors and perpetrators provides crucial insights into how the camp's design affected human behavior. Prisoners described how the systematic dehumanization broke down their will to resist. Guards explained how the bureaucratic structure allowed them to avoid thinking about the moral implications of their actions. The camp's design didn't just kill bodies, it destroyed souls. Today, Auschwitz stands as a memorial to its victims and a warning about the dangers of systematic evil. The preserved buildings, artifacts, and documentation serve as evidence of what happens when ordinary people participate in extraordinary evil. The camp's design principles continue to offer lessons about how societies can slide toward genocide. The evil design of Auschwitz wasn't the work of monsters or madmen. It was created by educated professionals who applied their skills to the systematic destruction of human life. Engineers, architects, doctors, and administrators all contributed their expertise to perfecting the machinery of genocide. This is perhaps the most terrifying lesson of all. Evil doesn't require exceptional cruelty. It only requires ordinary people willing to participate in extraordinary systems of oppression and murder. Understanding Auschwitz's design helps us recognize similar patterns in other genocides throughout history. The systematic dehumanization, the bureaucratic organization, the economic incentives, and the psychological manipulation techniques have been replicated in different forms across the globe. The camp's blueprint for evil didn't die with the Nazi regime. The story of Auschwitz reminds us that civilization is fragile and that the capacity for evil exists within ordinary institutions and everyday people. The camp's designers weren't alien beings driven by incomprehensible motives. They were human beings who made conscious choices to participate in genocide. Their evil was systematic, calculated, and entirely preventable. This is why we must never forget Auschwitz and why we must continue to study its operations. Not to sensationalize the suffering of its victims, but to understand how such systematic evil becomes possible and to ensure it never happens again. The camp's evil design serves as both a memorial to those who perished and a warning to those who remain. In remembering their stories, we honor their memory and protect our future.